Welcome to Exponential Church's online experience. We are back to our live in-person services, and we want to invite you to join us every Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. We meet at Renaissance Charter School in Tradition, located at 10900 Tradition Parkway here in Port St. Lucie, Florida. It's super easy to find us. Just drive west all the way to the end of Tradition Parkway, and you can't miss us. We are at the end of the road on the left. But we understand that some people are not ready for the large gathering type setting yet. So that's why we are continuing with these online experiences. This is a condensed version of what a Sunday morning-like experience would look like at Expo. But it is the same sermon that Pastor Steve is going to be preaching to those who are gathering for the live services. So you're not missing out on that. If you don't want to feel alone watching the message today, just smash that like button on this video and then share it with your friends on social media. Or if you're watching on YouTube, copy the link and text it to your friends and family. You never know, this could be a life-changing message to someone you know. So without further ado, let's open God's Word and worship Him this morning.
The old Abbott and Costello comedy routine called Who's On First? It's this hilarious sketch where Abbott is trying to tell Costello about the players on his baseball team and the strange names that the players have. Who is on first, what is on second, and I don't know what is on third. Because the players' names are questions, Costello cannot figure out why Abbott keeps asking him about his team. So this lapse in communication, it causes them to go round and round and get frustrated over the entire conversation. Sometimes, unfortunately, talking to our spouses seems to be a reenactment of this old comedy sketch. For many couples, it seems as if their conversations just go round and round in circles and it never accomplishes anything but frustrations. And when it gets to this point, most would rather just stop the communication altogether. Almost without exception, couples who are in marital conflict suffer from a major lack of communication. When the ability to communicate is strained or destroyed, all manner of problems develop and build in a relationship, sometimes to the point of beyond repair. The establishment of good communication and awareness of bad communication can save you a lot of difficulty in your marriage. Jonathan Robertson, a couples therapist and an author, he wrote in his book that's called More Love, Less Conflict, he wrote these words: "The number one thing is that people want to be understood and they want to feel like their emotions are being valued. And when that doesn't happen, marriages start to have problems. I never have couples come into my office saying, we really understand each other, that's why we want a divorce." But of course the opposite happens all the time. It's important to learn to understand each other. And in all aspects of life, communication is key. But in marriage, if there's a communication breakdown, it can bring the whole thing down. And because of that, I believe it is vital for couples to learn to communicate effectively. Unfortunately, however, that's usually a lot easier said than done. So today, I want us to explore the necessity of having good communication within the framework of marriage. And really, this could flow into any relationship that you have, a relationship with your kids, a relationship with a boss or a coworker, or just a friend even. It could flow into any of those. We'll also look at factors that will break down that good communication, just so that we're aware of the dangers and avoid such of a fall. You know, I'm hoping that you'll find in this message some very practical and useful information within the confines of relationships. But also, I'm hoping that you're going to see the spiritual backbone of communication as well. In spite of the idea of many, the ability to communicate, it does not require a college course on the subject. Talking should really just be a natural flow of the very relationship that a husband and wife share. You see, marriage joins a man and a woman together as one flesh, right? Therefore, the remainder of their each individual lives, it ought to be shared with one another. If communication was a college course in marriage university, though, it would be a required class because, listen, communication is necessary. Let me jump into things today with sharing you 3 reasons that communication is necessary. Number 1, simply for the sharing of feelings. Married couples should enjoy the privilege of being able to talk about their feelings, to share their joys and admit their fears and express their opinions to one another without any reservation. Who better should one talk to about such sensitive matters than the one that God has given to be an intimate companion for life? A wonderful thing happens when 2 people share their hearts with one another. They become bound together by these feelings that they each possess and share. And so couples should share their feelings together. Number 2, it should be for the sharing of life events. When 2 people are separated for a period of time, right? We're one flesh, but we're individuals, so we have individual lives, correct? And so when we're separated for a period of time, whether that's because of work, or maybe it's a business trip, or maybe a girls' weekend, or maybe some kind of other individual, a fishing trip, whatever it might be, events happen in his or her life that constitutes a part of the whole of that individual. Those events should, at least in some degree, they should be shared with each other. Or else what happens is a part of that life is gone forever. Now, this doesn't mean that every detail and every minute has to be accounted for, in these times. But however, it does not mean that by way of communication, one should take the other with them through the time that they were apart. By sharing the significant events and conversations and the feelings. You don't have to detail everything. But you should say, it was fun, when you're talking about a trip or something. You should share some of the events and what happened. The third necessity of communication is for the settling of disputes. Matthew chapter 18, verse 15, it says, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you've gained your brother. Listen, here's the deal. If you've been married for any amount of time, you probably know this. No marriage will ever be without some level of disagreement. We're going to talk more about this in a couple weeks, but please understand, the marriage does not have to stay in a constant state of turmoil. Communication is the answer to settle disputes, to work through issues and disagreements and things. Communication is a necessity. Now, for some people, they just don't know what good communication is. For some, because of their own upbringing, they've never even seen an example of what good communication is. So to find out what good communication is, I want us to dive into Scripture today. Look at Ephesians chapter 4 with me. Beginning there in verse 24, all the way down to verse number 32. It says, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Let no corrupt talking come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as it fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. Now, right here in this passage, we're going to see characteristics that lead to bad communication and characteristics that lead to good communication. Let me point out the bad here at first. Maybe you see this in there. It talked about falsehood, this idea of lying to each other. That's bad communication. It talks about anger in there and how that leads to bad communication. Giving place to the devil there. That would be like unholy speech, unholy talk, unholy words there. It talked about stealing. And think about this for a moment. When have you used words to steal joy, to steal happiness, or to steal peace from your partner? That's bad communication. It talks about corrupt talk, which would be degrading speech. It talks about words that would grieve the Holy Spirit. It talks about bitterness. That would be like resentful speech that you would have towards your partner. It talked about wrath. Wrath is that extreme anger that people have, when they really blow the lid, blow their top, whatever, in there. It talks about clamor. That's shouting, yelling in anger. Slander, those false accusations that often comes up in arguments. And then there's malice. Malice is that ill will that comes from the heart, where you've just been so sick of your partner that you've got this ill will towards them. Those are all things, characteristics of bad communication. But this passage also lists things that lead to good communication. It talked about righteousness and holiness. It talked about truthful speech. It talked about being edifying, that idea of building one another up, encouraging one another, being each other's hype person, if you will. It talks about graceful speech. It talks about kind speech, being tender-hearted in your words, and also forgiveness. All of that leads to good communication. And listen, these are just a few of both good and bad types of communication, conversation. It's important to keep track of which category each of your conversations fall into, in order for us to help stay on the good side of our spouses. Look at what Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18 has to say. It says, "There is one whose rash words are like sword thrust, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." You see, this passage is simply pointing out that there's two types of conversation. There's good communication and there's bad communication. The bad communication is like being stabbed with a knife. It's painful, it hurts, right? It can be deadly even. But good conversation, it can heal the wounds from bad conversation. But let me point out to you here, communication, it's not only speaking, but it's listening. For couples to have proper communication, there must be an ample amount of listening as the spouse speaks. We got to be able to hear what they're saying and listen to the words, listen to how they're saying what they're saying. So to help us to understand how to speak and also how to listen, let me offer to you some rules for effective communication. Number one, truthful speaking and honest listening. You wouldn't think I'm going to pass over that quick, right? Listen, when you speak the truth, do it in love. And when you're not speaking, don't just be thinking about what your next statement's going to be, what your comeback is going to be in that argument. Truly listen to what's being said by your partner. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15, the first part of that verse, it says, "Rather, speaking the truth in love." James chapter 1, verse 19, it says, "Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger." I think oftentimes we get that reversed. I mean, we're often quick to speak and slow to hear. We need to have truthful speaking and honest listening. Number two, we need to speak from the heart, but be aware that another heart is affected. That old phrase that says, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me," that's completely false. Words can't hurt. When words come out of your mouth, you understand, it's kind of like a tube of toothpaste, Once you squeeze that toothpaste out, man, you cannot shove it back into the tube. And so we have to be very careful with the words that we use, because another heart is being affected by those words. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 11 says, "A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back." Number three, nothing is insignificant if the spouse needs to express it. If your partner expresses a hurt feeling, don't blow it off as being ridiculous or dumb or pointless. Recognize their feeling, acknowledge their feelings, and apologize for making them feel that way. You don't have to admit intent. If you did not intentionally mean to make them feel that way, it doesn't change their feelings. They're still feeling it. And so we need to apologize. Listen, I'm sorry that you made me that I made you feel that way. I did not mean to do that at all. And that's the best thing to do. Don't try to justify your words. Don't try to argue your way out of why their feelings are wrong. Just to recognize their feelings. Just because you didn't mean to hurt their feelings, it does not dismiss the fact that they're having those feelings. And so just be there with it. Number 4, speak with words of honor and honor what is spoken. If you care about your partner at all, you're going to care about the things that are on their heart. So listen to them and work with them to get through it together. Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 28, it says, "The heart of the righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things." Be righteous. Think about your words. Think about how to answer. Think about how to work through things together. Number 5, what is hard to talk about will usually be harder to live with if unspoken. That whole idea of sweeping things under the rug, you realize all that does is create a lump in the rug that somebody's eventually going to trip over and fall and probably get hurt from. You can't do that. You got to be able to talk things out. What happens is that if something's bothering you and you're just trying to sweep it under the rug, what happens is it's almost like whatever your partner is doing just magnifies. And every time they do it, it's like, I can't believe they're doing that. And then eventually that's what happens. You trip over the lump you created by sweeping everything under the rug. You blow a top. Things don't go the way that you would have hoped they would have gone. Number 6, understand there's always a third person listening to every conversation. And no, it's not Alexa and it's not Siri. It's God. Maybe try this next time that you and your partner get into a fight. Pull up a chair next to you guys while you're fighting and let that chair represent that God is sitting there with you through that argument. That might possibly change some of the things that are said and some of the things that are done in that argument. Proverbs chapter 19 verse 14, it says, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer." We need to make sure that the words that are coming out of our mouth will be acceptable to God, as if God were right there listening to our conversation. So, what happens in a lot of marriages is that obstacles or hindrances, they creep into the communication between the husband and the wife. And sometimes it's unnoticed and sometimes it's by obvious effort. Proverbs chapter 15 verse 1, it says, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." Be very careful not to get to a point where a majority of your words are harsh. In reality, none of your words should be harsh. Now it happens because we are people of the flesh, but we need to really be on guard for that. But it does happen, and so let me show you 5 ways how your communication is hindered. All right, 5 ways how your communication is hindered. Number 1, speaking only to be heard. That whole idea of getting things off of your chest, that idea of communication, it usually leads to an argument. Listen, you should speak to one another for the purpose of expression, not explosion. Proverbs chapter 18 verse 2 says, "A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion." Don't be a fool when it comes to communication. Number 2, hearing, but not listening. Again, you didn't think I was going to let you get away with this, right? Communication should be an expression of not only the words being said, but also the tone in which they are spoken, the context in which they are spoken, and the meaning behind the words being spoken, if not verbally precise. We have got to listen to what's being said and listen to body language and tone and those things not being said. What is our spouse really trying to communicate to us? Proverbs chapter 18 verse 13. It says, "If one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame." Proverbs chapter 29 verse 20. It says, "Do you see a man who is hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him." Number 3, not taking the time. Listen, simply put, if you're too busy to talk, then you're too busy. And something has got to be cut so that you can find time for you guys to talk. Number 4, shutting down. I'll be transparent here. This is the one I struggle with in arguments. Is this idea of shutting down. But when the husband or the wife completely shuts out what the other is saying, there can be no constructive dialogue. Avoid saying things like, I just don't want to hear it. Avoid that. Here's the hard truth. The silent treatment never accomplished a thing. It doesn't work. Don't shut down an argument. Find a way to communicate and to talk things out. Number 5, a loss of trust. Marriage is based on trust. And almost every facet of trust comes from the area of communication. And so when trust is violated, communication suffers the most. Colossians chapter 4, verse number 6, it says, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. In his book, His Needs, Her Needs, which, by the way, is my favorite marriage book of all time, Willard Harvey, he shares 4 enemies of good conversation and 4 friends of good conversation. And I want to share these with you today because the odds are they're being used in your marriage and you don't even recognize it. And some of you are like, Steve, stop with all the lists. Why do you keep doing this? And listen, I'm giving you all these lists today because people communicate in different ways. And so I'm hoping that some of these lists, maybe it hits some person, maybe it hits another person. Maybe the husband's going to be affected by this list. The spouse is going to be affected by this list. And so that's why I'm giving you all these lists today, okay? I know it's a lot, but listen to these, okay? Let's start here with the 4 enemies of good conversation. Enemy number 1, using conversation to get your way at a spouse's expense. It's this whole idea of making demands, if you will. Listen, there's nothing wrong with asking for what you want from each other. But when it becomes a demand, it gets really dangerous. Whenever you make a demand, you're telling your spouse that you don't really care how he or she is feeling when they fulfill it, right? You just want what you want, and that's all that matters. And here's the thing. Even if you get your spouse to give in to your demand this time, you can be certain that the next time, he or she's going to be on guard, and they're going to end up fighting fire with fire, and they're going to have their own demands for you. Enemy number 2, using conversation to punish each other. I'm talking here about like verbal slander, verbal abuse. Over time, spouses, they learn these key phrases. They learn these words that, we know the word that will trigger our partner. And once we use those words to trigger our partner, once that happens, the argument usually gets out of hand and all kinds of hurtful words begin to fly and it just goes crazy real fast. What happens with this type of communication is that resentment builds. And it builds to the point of spouses hating each other and even less willing to work towards a happy marriage. Enemy number 3, using conversation to force agreement to your way of thinking. That's this idea of not having respect for your partner's opinions. Never force your spouse to agree with you. If you guys can't come to an agreement, learn to respect your spouse's opinion and try to get a better understanding of where they're coming from in this situation. Enemy number 4, dwelling on mistakes, past or present. People naturally do not like criticism or correction. And when they're confronted with either, usually what we end up doing is we try to justify our actions or we try to cast blame somewhere else. But here's the thing. Mistakes are difficult to prove, right? What one person might call a mistake can seem correct to another person's perspective. Let me encourage you with this. Have a teachable spirit. If your partner expresses feelings, understand that they're the best judge of their own feelings. That's why we talked about earlier that you can't dismiss your partner's feelings. They're the best judge of it. Acknowledge the feelings and then ask how to best help those feelings in the future. How can I best help not offend you in this area next time? Ask those questions. It's not an attack of criticism, but it's an act of care. Now, let's talk about the 4 friends of conversation. Friend number 1, developing interest in each other's favorite topics of conversation. one gift that God has given me is just simply the ability to talk to people. In fact, my kids make fun of me for it all the time because I can meet somebody in line for fast food and within like 5 minutes, I can know a whole lot of a person's life story. Let me tell you the secret of how I can do that. I ask people about themselves. I take an interest in their life to find out what their interests are. And I ask a lot of questions until eventually that person opens up and begins to talk. You see, many people, they need to begin their conversation with subjects that prime the pump, if you will. And once you get people talking, then you can switch almost naturally and fluidly. You can switch topics and keep the conversation flowing. And the same is true with your spouse. Take an interest in what interests your spouse. And listen, if you begin to ask them about those things and what they're doing, listen, I'm sure the communication is going to improve. They're just going to start naturally talking about things. Friend number 2, balancing the conversation. Just simply letting each other speak and letting each other voice opinions. Those who monopolize conversation create an unwanted habit in their spouses. Silence. Be sensitive to giving your partner time to speak on a topic at hand. And remember, wait until your spouse completes a thought before you start commenting on it. Don't cut them off mid-sentence or mid-thought. Let them finish. Friend number 3, using conversation to inform, investigate, and understand your spouse. Basically, this idea of giving details and understanding, investigating your partner's feelings and understanding what makes them happy. Here's the thing. Conversation creates closeness. In order for this to happen, the conversation has to be more than just the shallow talk that you would have with strangers. If you want a satisfying marriage, you must take time to inform, investigate, and understand each other. Inform each other of your personal interests and activities, desiring to bring each other into your spheres of interest. Investigate each other's personal feelings and attitudes without necessarily trying to change the other. And then understand each other's motivation in life. What makes them happy? What makes them sad? And then friend number 4, giving each other undivided attention. Focusing on your spouse. Communication cannot be at its best if you are divided on your attention. Listen, put down the phone. Turn off the TV and just focus on what's being said. And let me point this out. Timing is key here, okay? Wives, don't expect to get your husband's full attention if it's Sunday afternoon and his favorite football team is playing. Don't expect to have a serious conversation with him at that moment. He's focused on that game. Husbands, if your wife is in the middle of painting her nails or doing her makeup, don't expect to have her full attention or expect her to stop what she's doing to talk to you. That's not the time. If it's a serious topic, choose your timing wisely. And look, here's what it comes down to. Caring partners converse in caring ways. Proverbs chapter 21 verse 23 says, "For whoever keeps his mouth and his tongue keeps himself out of trouble." If you want to stay out of trouble in the communication area of your marriage, learn to keep your mouth and tongue under control. Be caring with the words and the tone that you use towards your spouse. Remember that Abbott and Costello sketch we talked about earlier? In their conversation that went so wrong, did you notice that they were actually on the same page and answers were being given to the questions that were being asked? The problem was a matter of perspective. More often than not, when you or and your spouse are in an argument, more than likely you're probably in agreement with what you're talking about. But the problem is a matter of perspective. If we can take a moment to step back and to try to see the conversation from the spouse's point of view and to actually listen to what is being said, then we can better understand the conversation that's being had. Sometimes our communication with our spouses, it's a lot like an IKEA assembly instruction guide. You ever seen those? If you're not familiar, IKEA is a Swedish furniture company, and they're known for a couple things. One, everything seems to be in 1,000 pieces when you buy it, and they put them all in like separate boxes, it seems like. And two, the instruction to put the furniture together has no words. It is just all pictures. Now, they do this because they're a global company, and so instead of trying to print instructions in multiple languages and all those types of things, they just figure, hey, let's just use pictures, and then we can just print one. Kind of saves them money and some hassle, if you will. Wordless instructions, however, though, they can have a couple drawbacks. One, they sometimes leave out steps, and two, they don't work well for those who are not good at translating the images they see into actions. The results can actually be tragic, and in fact, in recent years, there have been at least 2 children who were killed when IKEA dressers tipped over onto them. Now, IKEA claims that it warns their buyers to anchor such items to the walls and to prevent them from tipping over. But image-only instructions are inadequate for conveying such important warnings. So what do we learn from this? Clear instructions and using effective mix of examples, if you will, like images and words, they're necessary to prevent frustration and safety in your marriage problems. In our relationships, we need a mix of examples and words to show our love, our appreciation, and our care for our partners. Without proper communication, it can be tragic. So if you want to make it until death do us part, then you have to learn to communicate.
Thank you for joining us for our online experience. If you gave your life to Jesus today, or if you have any more questions, please feel free to email me and I'll get back with you as soon as possible. If you'd like to invest in the ministry of Expo Church, you can do that from anywhere, as you have 2 easy options. You can text the dollar amount to the number 84321 and follow the instructions to give that way. Or you can go to our website, expochurch.com, find our giving tab, and follow those instructions. I want to thank those of you who chose to be faithful in your giving to this ministry, and I want you to know that your generosity is helping meet the needs of those in our community, as well as reaching people across the world through our global giving to missionaries around the world. Thank you again for joining us today, and we hope you have a fantastic week.